Hey there folks, I'm Bryce Holdaway, co-host of The Property Couch, and with me today I've got Nerida Conisbee, who is the Chief Economist at the REA Group, better known to most of you as realestate.com.au or realcommercial.com.au. Hello, how are you?
Good, I'm well.
That's good. Hey, stick around today folks, because we've got lots to cover, because not only at the end of this Facebook Live are we going to go through the most looked at listing for auctions, the most looked at listing in general, the most expensive property that was sold during the week. But we're actually going to give you a masterclass, a 101 on the trade war between the US and China, which is really interesting. Because what I'm interested in is because you spend so much time dealing at a level when you're talking from the perspective of, you know, a keynote or whatever. But what I thought would be nice for us to do is maybe just drill down and see what the basics are when it comes to what's going on in the US trade, the US-China trade war, and more importantly, what impact might that have on us in Australia and potentially property prices?
Yeah, so, definitely.
You up for it?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So what I've done, here's one I prepared a little bit earlier for you.
Okay.
Maybe you can explain to us what's actually going on here.
Okay. All right. So Trump announced tariffs on all Chinese goods. So anything coming out of China is getting additional taxes when it's imported into the US. China retaliated, so they made the same, did the same. So anything coming out of the US into China has now been tariffed. So what this means is it's cutting into economic growth. So it's partly, growth, GDP in China is now, it's not declining, but the level is now at its lowest level in 3 decades.
Yep.
The US is also starting to slow. So again, I shouldn't be putting a downward arrow because it's not declining, but the level of growth is slowing.
Yep.
So it's impacted trade, but it is also starting to impact foreign direct investment. So a lot of money, not just trade, comes through here, but a lot of money from China, for example, goes to the US and invests in real estate and tech and all sorts of things. And similarly, there'd be money flowing this way as well.
Yep.
And it's starting to cut into levels of foreign direct investment into the two countries. So that exacerbates this. So GDP keeps slowing in both these countries.
And it is as simple as saying, you know, Trump had this policy to make America great again. So instead of trying to import everything, they're trying to make the domestic front a bit more competitive. But it just kind of made sense that they would retaliate. Yeah,
of course. And they retaliate. And also the time, it is hard for the US to suddenly pick up on all the stuff they get from China. So although they want to produce more in the US, you can't suddenly pick up production to such an extent that China will, all the stuff you get from China, you no longer need to get it. So what's happening in the US now, they're bypassing China and they're going to countries, I'll just through here, Vietnam, South Korea, Thailand.
Yep.
They're starting to get stuff exported from there.
Okay.
So these guys are really happy.
Yep.
So their economic growth is going up because of the US. We're not happy because we do rely heavily on China. So we not only import a lot from China, which isn't so impacted, we also export a lot from China. We do from the US as well, but not to the same extent. So we're not so reliant on the US as we are in China. And not just, we're similar, we also rely on a lot of money that's coming out of China, which is funding a lot of things in Australia. So what happens is these guys are going down. That impacts our GDP. Our GDP starts to slow. It will potentially lead to a rise in unemployment. So that's the bad news. Probably the good news for property is that with China and the US starting to go backwards, they need to try and combat that slow growth. So they'll probably cut interest rates in both countries. So that means cheaper for us, for our banks, in terms of wholesale funding. But with our GDP going down and our unemployment rate going down, we're also cutting rates.
With not much further to go.
Not much further to go. Well, at least we've got some way to move. So for property, and this is what does typically happen in Australia, we see kind of quite negative economic situations, but our cost of debt goes down. And as we've seen at the moment, people flow into property. And so the impact on property prices, it's a little bit unknown. So we've got this, at the moment, they're going up because of this. But we may, if that gets too high,
Yeah.
then that will start
drop
to
some
cut in.
confidence.
So that's kind of the outlook at the moment. That on one hand, we've got all these problems here. It's making our cost of finance cheaper. But on the other side, we've got potential for rising unemployment, which would be bad news for property.
Who's winning? Because they have wanted to send a message across here, but they're both having to respond because their growth is going down. It's actually impacting globally. So what was the initial intention, and how far or close are we to the rewards of what that initial intention was?
Look, I think there's a lot of political issues around what's happening. I mean, I think the first one, there was a lot of concern about China taking a lot of intellectual property out of the US. And so, in some ways it was a little bit retaliatory for that. There's also problems in the US in that manufacturing, like much of, like Australia and much of the developed world is seeing a decline and is impacting certain people. And those areas in the US that do rely on manufacturing have been hit very, very hard economically. So while, somewhere like tech, if you look at somewhere like San Francisco, and Silicon Valley, that is doing very, very well because there's lots of money coming out of China. There's all these startups and people are pouring in. Whereas you go to some of the smaller towns in the US, some of these towns are just almost 100% reliant on one manufacturer.
Yeah.
They're doing very badly. So there's this real, I guess, economic divide in the US, which is partly what this was trying to address. I mean, the good news is at the moment they are in talks to try and sort it out. Yeah. So I think there is a realization that trade wars aren't great for either of them. Not great globally, which they probably care less about, but for their own economies, they're no doubt concerned about that.
Well, interesting. If we go back domestically, you talked about here with the prices. It's what do you see on the horizon for the next 6 to 12 months? Because what I found in chatting with the team is it's definitely in Melbourne a real sense that we've bottomed already. And we were sort of predicting it more towards the latter part of the year. But I can assure you now that in where we're buying, the activity is really strong to the point where if someone's got a budget of 800,000, they've got to go back to the old days of starting to shop where it's in the 600s, right? And there's been a lot of work done on underquoting, but unfortunately, this is now kicking back in because these were the conditions, particularly with the election and a bit of the inertia, that the quotes were reflective of what it was. But we're missing out on properties that we should not be absolutely missing out on in suburbs that we thought that we would have been a shoo-in. So, and in Melbourne, you've got the Bayside areas that have they started to tank the most through the correction, but they're now starting to find their floor and sort of move on. And so if that's the case, that's almost like that's like a lag indicator to the stuff that's happening on the north and the west.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is interesting because you do have, with property markets around Australia, you do have these macro influences. You've got interest rates and you've got unemployment and you've got, growth of the Australian economy. But then you've got a lot of local influences as well. And, at the moment, we've got stock shortages. Listings are really low. We've got what's typical in the start of a growth cycle in Melbourne and Sydney. We do have people going towards premium. Mm-hmm. So, people have seen prices come back and they're starting to flood back in. You only have to look at auction numbers, and auction numbers are down 70% some weeks compared to where they were last year. And if you consider last year, we were at the height of the decline, whereas we had more than double the number of auctions taking place. So there's all these micro influences, and I think this is the challenge a lot of people have with property. A lot of people will look at these macro influences and say, right, it's stuffed, there's a lot too much going on, it's all bad news, so it's bad for property. But on the other hand, you've got low listings, you've got a tendency of Australians to see property as a safe haven. If you're looking at taking on some shares, you might be a little bit worried, or getting into the equity markets. With property, people feel a little bit safer around. So
control, tangible, they can touch it. It's the great Australian dream.
And they've done well. If you have a look at how well people have done with property over the past decade, you only have to see that prices have done pretty well, and people have been pretty happy with their investments.
Well, this is a good sort of illustration as to why that might be the case, because you've got this country compared to we're politically stable, but we've got this wonderful lifestyle. We've got stable governments, stable political system anyway, and people just sort of wanting to move here in droves, which is, given the fact that we settle on the outside, unlike the US where we go in the middle, we settle on the outside. So I think, long term for Australia, it's nothing but good news for anyone who's got their name on a title now. But it's going to be challenging news for people who don't have their name on the title, because it's going to continually grow.
I mean, affordability problems. I mean, you only have to look at Sydney, third least affordable city in the world, to see some of the challenges we have with rising prices and the fact that, we all love property. Yeah,
absolutely. So have you got a view on, like, say Perth, for example? Have your assessments changed much on that market?
Look, not over the last couple of months. I definitely think Melbourne, Sydney have bottomed out, and we, definitely premium is starting to move. Brisbane's looking pretty good. Perth keeps showing signs that it should get better. Yes. We are seeing, we continue to see premium suburb. Cottesloe continues to rise in prices. We see that western part of Perth do well. I think Perth. Oh, and also there's a lot of search activity coming out of Asia, and which is quite unusual because everywhere else they're not looking, but in Australia, in Perth they are. So that's positive. I think Perth, though, premium will continue to do pretty well, but that ripple effect is taking a long time to come off, and I think perhaps
particularly if some of this that you're talking about,
and also the fringe. Perth, there's been so much development, and and there's quite a lot of distress in those areas, so it'll take some time to unfold.
Hey, that's the residential. What about the flow-on effect to commercial? What are you seeing there?
Yeah, well, commercial is interesting because you mentioned before about Australia being seen as a bit of a safe haven, and as a result, we are seeing more and more money looking to buy commercial property from overseas, and primarily because if you're in China, investing in the US at the moment does seem quite dangerous because you're not, there's a lot of uncertainty as what Trump will do with foreign investment. But, Australia is seen as a fairly safe investment type. Also, vacancy rates are very, very low for office and industrial at the moment. So that's, has a lot to do with the fact that unemployment, although rising slightly, it's still pretty low, and particularly white-collar employment in office markets is leading to very, very positive situation there.
We were chatting before, there were some trends that you were seeing from the data on your site that the growth is out west. If you're on the eastern seaboard, what did you see when you were looking at that?
Yeah, I mean, it was quite interesting. We had a look 10-year and 5-year growth, and what it showed was that over the past decade, Western Sydney has been the top performer, particularly this is for houses, so it's not excludes apartments. But Parramatta, the region of Parramatta, so Parramatta and its surrounding suburbs, actually saw the greatest price growth over a 10-year time period to June 2019. 5-year, we had a lot to do with Melbourne. So Melbourne, Ballarat, Geelong, Hobart were the top performers, and again, number one was Western Melbourne. So I think ultimately what drives property is long term is population growth, and what we have in Melbourne and Sydney is this real push westwards as east becomes far less affordable. So from a percentage growth perspective, it does seem to benefit.
Are you seeing in any of the population trends that Melbourne and Sydney are getting the majority, but there'd be a lot of people sort of going, I can take a haircut on income and go over to Adelaide, for example, and start to maybe reassess whether I'm going to go to the big smoke of Melbourne and Sydney, and maybe accept a lower paid job, but I've got a better lifestyle and I can afford a bigger house, and it's a 15-minute city. If I've got to get anywhere, I can drive 15 minutes and usually park out in the front.
Yeah, I mean, look, we see some interesting behaviour on search. So, people in Sydney, we often see them searching the Gold Coast, for example, and I think that's a little bit to do with affordability and kind of similar lifestyles. Sydney, Melbourne people, we do see them move more southwards. Hobart has probably benefited from Melbourne people.
We're used to the cold, so might as well get up.
Can't get anywhere. And then if we go, Adelaide is quite fascinating at the moment because we have seen a lot of investment in premium Adelaide, so inner Adelaide and kind of beachside. But when we have a look at rental demand, a lot of the rental demand is scattered throughout the city. So I think what's happening in Adelaide, there's lots of different jobs being created, lower income, higher income, middle income, and as a result, we are seeing quite a mixed result from that.
All right, let's bring it home with the two usuals, interest rates, and we talked a little bit about clearance rates. But I think, do you guys see, people use that as a metric to gain confidence or not? But when we're trading so thinly on a couple of hundred, when we're used to Super Saturdays and those sorts of things over 1,000, how do you and your team digest that in terms of getting a read on the market? If
there's something there.
Yeah.
I mean, I tend to look at clearance rates only Melbourne and Sydney because the other cities. I mean, you look at Hobart, which has been red hot for a long time. You've got one auction a week happening, so often you get a 0% clearance rate. But Melbourne and Sydney does give you enough volume. I think at the moment, though, you do need to be mindful that if people are going to auction in Melbourne and Sydney, they're in premium suburbs. Yeah. So, we do have auction activity. It is showing strength in premium suburbs, which is, what you were explaining earlier, that people looking at that 800,000 price point aren't really finding what they want. So premium's doing very well. We know there's lots of buyer activity, but, those auction numbers are so low. I think that the thing that is so great about clearance rates is it's every week. And so, you can get it Saturday night, you can get a really quick read on the market. It kind of shows what's happening, but you do need to be mindful of the numbers and not just the percentage clearance rate, but also the number of auctions taking place. Yeah,
what we're trying to do is find out the clearance rate at the suburb level.
Yes.
Because that gives us a really good sense because, say, Middle Park here in Victoria, it's 100% clearance rates all the time, right? So where those pockets are, give us a better sense of, are we in the 80s, are we in the 90s, given that sort of volume. But yeah, we cannot wait for there to be an increase in listings. Yeah. I'm sure core business would be happy about that as well. But I think we're just down the road from people who had all that indecision around the election, expecting a Labor government to come in, and then all of a sudden they go, oh wow, maybe I should start to think about it. And so it needed to create some momentum. So hopefully,
I think too, I think a lot of people who are looking to sell would probably be right, it's at the bottom now. Wait, leave it a few months, and, see what happens, and that's a sensible response as well.
We're hoping for a busy spring. Interest rates,
I think it'll be a hold.
Yeah.
We had Bill Evans, who is the elder of interest rate forecasting, saying they'll get down to 0.5 early next year. So, hopefully things don't go that bad that they do need to cut that far. But they're still looking on their way down, and
just got to worry about that one, don't we?
Yeah, it's the unemployment. The inflation numbers are out this week too, so we'll see then what's happening then.
All right, well, I think we'll close this off with a bit of a look at what the market's doing. So this one here is the most expensive real estate this last week. Went for $4.1 million. And what you get is 5 acres of acreage in, just to give some context for those people not familiar with New South Wales or the Greater Sydney region. This is in the north, it's in the Hills District. There's the Sydney CBD, which you think, geez, that's a fair way out, but it's when you get out here, you're starting to get those really big acreage estates, which are really nice. So.
Yeah, and then you've got the new Northwest train line as well, which would be helping people get into this area.
We'll have a look at what you can get here. I've got a little story about Dural. This suburb changed the trajectory of my television career because I did in the very first season of Relocation Australia, which later we switched over to Location. We were adapting a very popular UK format. And so Veronica and I were going through what do they compare to those guys? Because they had such a brand, right? And then we had a customer who was particularly prickly and particularly tricky, and she wanted to buy in Dural. And at that point, the audience was endeared to us because they thought, if you guys can endure that, you can endure anything. And it was really a pivotal moment. So Dural,
soft spot
for Dural. So that's what you can get, folks, if you've got $4.1 million. This one was the most clicked on listing that's going to auction. And this one here is, a little single fronter in a highly desirable part of Paran, which is in the leafy part of Melbourne for those people outside of Victoria. But I kind of looked at it and thought, Sure, there's quite a few. It's beautiful, and
it's lovely.
but there's a lot of them around, right? So what was unique about it? I think the fact that it didn't have a quote range probably meant it popped up in a lot of searches, and so people were checking that out. But
yeah, it is a, I mean, like you said, very popular suburb, and I think too, being solid brick and pretty well presented would also be something that would keep people
well presented. You're right, solid brick, because quite often in Prahran you'll get weatherboards here.
Next door looks a bit weatherboard.
Yeah, so that's what you get the most clicked on. This one here is the most clicked on listing of all, not just going to auction. So on 512 square metres. This is in the southeast, the far southeast of Melbourne, just to give you guys a bit of context here. There we go. It's a fair way out, right? Yeah. So, but I think just in terms of what's on offer there,
it's pretty nice home, isn't it?
Yeah, it's featured quite nicely throughout. It's certainly not what you would expect from your standard home down that part of the world. So yeah, really nice home, which makes sense. And then this one here is the most viewed rental. Now, you'd think this is a pretty good rental because it's actually on for $200 per week, which isn't too bad. You look at that and go, wow. But as soon as you realise it's a one-bedder, kind of makes a bit more sense.
Yeah, it's pretty tiny.
It's not the first time that we've seen a very well-priced listing in Queensland come up as the most clicked on.
I think it was last time, wasn't it?
Yeah, so
that one. Although that was further out, but
it was a bit further out. So there you go, folks. Straight from the coalface, realestate.com.au have given us those listings. But I appreciate you going through that with us today in terms of the US-China trade war, because people see that, but it's nice to sort of break it down and see what impacts it's having. And hopefully people get to understand that a little bit more. But thanks again for coming onto the Property Couch. It's always a pleasure. Folks, if you want to check us out, we're out every Thursday at 3 p.m. So go to thepropertycouch.com.au.